Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my HOA Karen Tales channel? Thank you so much. I never thought I'd become the neighborhood legend for parking yacht in my driveway. But when you're dealing with an HOA Karen drunk on power, sometimes you need to make a statement. My name's Daniel, and until 6 months ago, I was just another resident of Oak Estates, a quiet suburban development with manicured lawns and, unfortunately, the most ridiculous homeowners association on the planet. It all started when I purchased a modest 24-foot RV for weekend getaways. Nothing flashy, just a practical vehicle for exploring national parks with my daughter on the weekends. I parked the RV neatly in my driveway, making sure it didn't extend onto the sidewalk or street. According to county regulations, there were no restrictions on parking recreational vehicles on private property, but Oak Estates wasn't governed by reason. It was governed by Karen. I first met Karen at the annual HOA summer barbecue 3 years ago. She approached me with a clipboard and that signature Karen haircut. You know, the one angled sharply at her chin, highlighted blonde, and practically engineered for speaking to managers. Karen's voice, "Excuse me, but your grass is approximately 3.5 inches tall. The bylaws clearly state a 3-inch maximum." I nodded politely while silently questioning my life choices that led me to live in a neighborhood where someone measured grass with a ruler. Later, I learned from my neighbor Jim that Karen worked in middle management at an insurance company, but treated her volunteer HOA position with the gravity of a Supreme Court appointment. Over the years, I'd managed to stay mostly under Karen's radar. I kept my grass short, my holiday decorations tasteful, and my trash cans hidden promptly after collection. I attended the mandatory HOA meetings quarterly, sitting quietly while Karen dramatically read aloud each violation notice she'd issued, like a general announcing battlefield victories. The morning after parking my new RV in the driveway, I was enjoying my coffee when the doorbell rang. There stood Karen, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. Karen's voice, "Good morning, Daniel. I see you've decided to turn our prestigious neighborhood into a trailer park." The way she said trailer park made it sound like I was harboring toxic waste. I smiled pleasantly. "Good morning, Karen. I see you're out early performing your self-appointed neighborhood surveillance." Her eyes narrowed, ignoring my offer. Section 7, paragraph 3 of our covenant clearly states, "No recreational vehicles visible from the street. You have 24 hours to remove it before I'm forced to issue a formal violation." She emphasized forced, as if tormenting residents caused her great personal anguish instead of obvious satisfaction. I pulled out my phone and opened the HOA documents I'd carefully reviewed before the purchase. I didn't anticipate this confrontation and had come prepared. "Actually, Karen, that rule applies to vehicles parked on the street. Mine is on private property, which falls under Section 12, which permits temporary parking of recreational vehicles for loading and unloading. I've highlighted it here if you'd like to review." I turned my phone screen toward her, showing the relevant passage. Ken's voice, "Temporary means 48 hours maximum per month. Are you planning to move it tomorrow?" The smirk on her face told me she thought she'd won. Her fingers twitched slightly at her side, as if already drafting the violation notice in her mind. "I'm loading and preparing it for a trip next weekend. According to the bylaws, I have precisely 48 hours. Thanks for your concern, though." I closed the door before she could respond, feeling slightly victorious, but knowing this was just the opening skirmish in what would undoubtedly become a neighborhood Cold War. Through the front window, I watched her stand there for a moment, slightly stunned that someone had actually cited the bylaws back to her before she marched back to her house across the street and 2 doors down. True to form, Karen didn't back down. The next day, a formal violation notice was taped to my door, printed on the official HOA letterhead with her signature large and bold at the bottom. The day after, another notice with bold red letters spelling "Final Warning" appeared, this one threatening a $100 daily fine. I continued referring to the bylaws, sending polite emails to the entire board, clarifying my interpretation, making sure to CC every member so Karen couldn't control the narrative. My RV remained in the driveway, loaded for my upcoming trip, precisely within the 48-hour window permitted. What I didn't know was that Karen had been building her case against me behind the scenes. She'd apparently called an emergency HOA board meeting without proper notice to all members, where she presented a series of complaints from neighbors about my RV. I later learned that these complaints were largely fabricated or exaggerated comments she'd solicited by telling neighbors she was conducting a survey about street aesthetics. On Friday evening, I returned from work excited for our Saturday morning departure. Amelia had already packed her special travel backpack with books, her tablet loaded with movies, and the stuffed otter she couldn't sleep without. We were planning to make an early start, driving to Yellowstone with a few interesting stops along the way. That's when I discovered my RV was missing from the drive. At first, I thought it had been stolen. I immediately called 911, reporting the theft of a vehicle worth tens of thousands of dollars. While waiting for the police, I received a text message from my neighbor Jim with a photo of my RV being towed away earlier that afternoon, with Karen supervising, a triumphant smile on her face as if she were posing with a big game trophy. The police arrived, and I explained the situation, showing them the bylaws and my documentation that I was within the permitted temporary parking window. The officer looked sympathetic, but explained this was a civil matter between me and the HOA. I would need to contact them directly about the removal of my property. I asked if the HOA had the right to tow a vehicle from private property without notice. The officer hesitated before suggesting I consult an attorney, his expression telling me everything I needed to know about the legality of what had happened. I called the towing company listed on the HOA information board. They informed me my RV had been impounded for covenant violations and that I owed $850 in towing fees plus $125 per day for storage. When I asked who authorized the tow, they confirmed it was Karen Wilkins, the HOA president, who had presented herself as the authorized representative of the property. They informed me that without payment and HOA clearance, they could not release the vehicle. That night, I had to explain to my daughter why our weekend trip was canceled. Seeing her disappointment turned my annoyance into genuine anger. Amelia had been looking forward to this trip for months, marking each day on her calendar, researching junior ranger programs, and creating a scrapbook in anticipation of all the memories we'd make. Now she sat on the couch, trying to be brave as tears welled in her eyes. "But Daddy, we followed the rules," she said quietly. "You always tell me that if I follow the rules, things will be okay." That moment crystallized everything for me. This wasn't just about an RV anymore or a petty neighborhood dispute. This was about Karen abusing her position to bully residents and teaching my daughter the wrong lesson about justice. I hugged Amelia tight and promised her we would still go on our trip just a little later than planned. Silently, I promised myself that this situation required a creative solution. The next morning, I paid the exorbitant fees to retrieve my RV and parked it at a storage facility 20 minutes away. Then I began researching HOA regulations thoroughly, not just our bylaws, but state laws governing homeowners associations. I discovered something fascinating. While there were strict rules about recreational vehicles, there was absolutely nothing in the bylaws about boats. This oversight wasn't surprising. We were hundreds of miles from any significant body of water in our landlocked state. Who would bring a boat to Oak Ridge Estates? Me. I would bring a boat to Oak Ridge Estates. I have a college buddy, Richard, who owns a yacht charter business on the coast. During our annual fishing trips, he'd always joke that I should try the yachting life. "Nothing clears the mind like blue water and open skies," he'd say, while I'd laugh and remind him that my mortgage didn't quite accommodate the purchase of a seafaring vessel. I called him that evening and explained my situation in detail, including Karen's escalating campaign and the disappointment on my daughter's face. Richard's voice let me get this straight. "You want to borrow a yacht? I parked in your driveway just to annoy your HOA president." When I confirmed this was exactly my plan, he laughed for nearly a minute straight. Richard's voice. "Daniel, this is the most beautifully petty thing I've ever heard. I have a 100-foot yacht that's in the shop for interior renovations. The hull and exterior are perfect, but the inside is gutted. You can borrow it for 2 weeks while the contractors are on vacation. It'll cost you the transport fees, though." Transport fees weren't cheap, but my daughter's excitement when I told her about our new temporary boat made it worthwhile. Is this to teach Miss Wilkins a lesson? She asked suddenly, understanding more than I'd given her credit for. I explained that sometimes you need to stand up to people who misuse their authority, but in a way that's creative and completely within the rules. Amelia's eyes lit up as we sketched our plan, dubbing it Operation Yacht Club. 3 days later, a massive specialty transport company arrived at my house at 7 a.m. with all proper permits to temporarily block the street. I'd filed for everything by the book: city permits, transportation clearance, even a structural assessment to ensure my driveway and yard could support the weight of the yacht when properly distributed on supports. The spectacle of a 100-ton luxury yacht being carefully positioned in my driveway and front yard drew quite the crowd. Neighbors emerged from their homes in pajamas and robes, coffee cups in hand, watching with a mixture of confusion and delight as the enormous vessel was moved into position. Children pointed and exclaimed, and more than a few adults took selfies with the unexpected backdrop. I had meticulously measured everything. The yacht would be entirely on my property, not extending onto the sidewalk or street. I stood watching with a cup of coffee as the yacht was expertly maneuvered into position. The transport team had done similar installations for boat shows and displays, so they worked with practiced efficiency. My driveway would never be the same, but watching Karen sprint from her house, still wearing her bathrobe and with her hair in disarray, was priceless. Her face cycled through confusion, shock, and finally a special shade of purple rage I'd never seen on a human before. Karen's voice: "What do you think you're doing? You can't park that monstrosity here." She was practically shrieking, her clipboard clutched so tightly I thought it might snap. She had apparently grabbed it on her way out the door, a security blanket of officiousness. I smiled pleasantly. "Good morning, Karen. Beautiful day, isn't it? Perfect weather for boating, though I suppose we'll have to enjoy it stationary for now." Karen's voice: "This is an outrageous violation. I'm calling the police, the city, everyone." She was already dialing on her phone, her hands shaking with indignation. I handed her a folder containing transport permits, temporary staging permits from the city, and highlighted copies of the HOA bill. "Feel free to call whoever you'd like. Everything is in order. I've reviewed our covenant thoroughly, and there are no restrictions on boats parked on private property. Recreational vehículos. Yes. Commercial vehicles? Yes. But not a word about boats." I smiled again at the picture of reasonable cooperation. I've even arranged for landscaping fabric underneath to protect the grass. Very environmentally conscious, wouldn't you agree? Karen flipped through the documents frantically, her hands shaking. This is clearly against the spirit of the regulations." "The spirit? I thought we were concerned with the exact letter of the law, Karen. That's what you emphasized when towing my RV from my property without notice, costing me nearly $1,000 and ruining my daughter's weekend." I took a satisfied sip of coffee. "By the way, we're having a little yacht watching party this evening. The whole neighborhood's invited around 6 p.m. Amelia's making lemonade." Karen stood there speechless for a moment, a vein visibly pulsing in her forehead. Then she spun on her heel and stormed back to her house, phone still clutched to her ear. I could hear her demanding to speak to someone in authority, anyone who could put a stop to this outrageous situation. Within an hour, a patrol car pulled up. The same officer who had taken my stolen vehicle report days earlier stepped out, took one look at the yacht, and broke into an unexpected grin. "Mr. Wheeler, when I said this was a civil matter, I didn't expect this." He gestured at the gleaming white vessel, now dominating not just my property, but the visual landscape of the entire street. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked innocently. "Not if you have permits," he replied, clearly fighting to maintain his professional demeanor. I provided the same folder of documentation I'd shown Karen. He reviewed it carefully, radioed in to confirm the permits were legitimate, and then handed everything back with a slight shake of his head. "Everything appears to be in order, though I should warn you. We've received multiple calls about this situation. I imagine you have, and I imagine you'll receive many more. But as you can see, I'm fully compliant with all relevant regulations, unlike the unauthorized towing of my vehicle from private property earlier this week." I kept my tone conversational, but the officer caught my meaning. He lowered his voice. Between you and me, Mr. Wheeler, that towing situation didn't sound right when you reported it. If you wanted to file a formal complaint about that, you'd have grounds. I thanked him for the information, and he left, but not before taking a quick personal photo of the yacht when he thought I wasn't looking. The yacht became the neighborhood sensation. Children asked to tour it, which I arranged safely with proper supervision and life jackets I'd borrowed from Richard. Neighbors brought drinks and snacks to our impromptu gatherings beside it. I strung decorative lights along its impressive sieve length and even projected movies onto its white hull for neighborhood movie nights. Jaws was unsurprisingly the most popular selection, though we also showed Finding Nemo for the younger crowd. Throughout it all, Karen was conspicuously absent, though I occasionally spotted her taking photos and making furious phone calls from her living room window. Word spread beyond our neighborhood. Local news caught wind of the story. Suburban Yacht Club man parks 100-foot vessel in driveway after HOA dispute. A reporter came out to interview me, and I carefully explained that this was simply a temporary solution while I arranged proper storage for my boat. I mentioned nothing about the RV incident, focusing instead on my love of sailing and desire to introduce my daughter to nautical adventures. The resulting human interest story painted me as an eccentric but harmless boat enthusiast, with a brief mention of ongoing discussions with the Homeowners Association about appropriate parking accommodations. The official HOA response came 3 days later, an emergency meeting to amend the bylaws to include boats and other watercraft in the restricted vehicles section. I attended, of course, dressed in a captain's hat and blue blazer with brass buttons for the occasion. When called upon to speak, I politely pointed out that any amendments would require a 75% majority vote from all homeowners and wouldn't apply retroactively to my temporarily parked yacht. I also mentioned that several board members had enjoyed our yacht movie night, which made Karen's face twitch uncontrollably. Furthermore, I added that if boats are to be restricted, I would like to propose a grandfather clause for existing nautical vehicles with a reasonable grace period of, say, 6 months to make alternative arrangements. This was met with a murmur of agreement from many homeowners who had found the whole situation more entertaining than annoying. Karen interrupted, her voice tight. This is clearly a bad faith exploitation of a loophole in our regulations. Mr. Wheeler has no intention of using this eyesore as an actual boat. It's merely a childish prank in response to being held accountable for his RV violation. I objected to the characterization of my yacht as an eyesore. I responded calmly. The Azimuth 100 is considered one of the most elegant vessels in its class. As for my intentions, I plan to have it transported to Lake Powell next month for its intended recreational purpose. Until then, it remains on my property in compliance with all current regulations. As the days passed, Karen escalated her efforts. She called city inspectors who verified I had the proper permits. She reported a non-existent oil leak from the yacht, resulting in environmental inspectors finding nothing and giving me a courtesy educational pamphlet about proper boat maintenance. She even started a petition that gained exactly 4 signatures: hers, her husband's, and 2 from her lawyer, friends who served as her informal neighborhood surveillance team. Meanwhile, I was building my case. I requested records of all HOA expenditures for the past year through proper channels, citing my rights as a dues-paying member. I spoke with neighbors who shared their own Karen stories. The Rodriguezes, who had been fined for having a basketball hoop visible from the street. The elderly Mrs. Abernathy, who had received multiple violations for bird feeders. And the Thompsons, whose children's rainbow-colored chalk drawings on their own driveway had been deemed graffiti. A pattern of selective enforcement and personal vendettas emerged. Most importantly, I consulted with an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, sharing documentation of the improper towing of my RV from private property without the required 48-hour written notice specified in our very own bylaws. The attorney, Helen Gonzalez, reviewed everything with a growing look of disbelief. "This is one of the most blatant abuses of HOA authority I've seen," she remarked. "Towing from private property without proper notice isn't just against your bylaws. It's potentially illegal conversion of property." She frowned, pointing to several entries. Why is the HOA paying for landscape consultation at a single residential address? And this charge for an administrative retreat, is that standard? The address in question was Karen's house, and the administrative retreat had coincided with her wedding anniversary weekend. Meanwhile, Amelia and I rescheduled our Yellowstone trip. We took photos beside the yacht before leaving, dressed in matching captain's hats, and posted them on the neighborhood social media page with the caption, "Bon voyage. See you in a week." I arranged for Jim to check on the yacht and watered the potted plants I'd placed decoratively around it. The trip was wonderful. Amelia earned her Junior Ranger badge. We saw Old Faithful erupt, and we managed to spot a bear from a safe distance. Throughout, I received updates from neighbors about Karen's increasingly frustrated attempts to have the yacht removed. 12 days into Yacht Gate, as the neighborhood now called it, the certified letter from my attorney was delivered to each HOA board member. It outlined how Karen had violated both HOA procedures and state law by authorizing the tow without proper notice. It detailed how she had misused HOA funds by paying for the tow from the association account rather than following the proper procedure of placing a lien for violations. The letter demanded reimbursement for all towing and storage fees, plus damages for the canceled trip and the emotional distress caused to my daughter. It concluded with a request for a full audit of HOA finances for the past 3 years. The most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. The HOA's own treasurer, inspired by my research, conducted an audit and discovered Karen had been using the HOA credit card for personal expenses. Karen made small purchases at first, but they grew more substantial over time. She bought garden supplies for her own yard, restaurant meals logged as board meeting expenses on days when no meetings occurred, and even a weekend spa retreat classified as an HOA management conference. The total misappropriated funds came to nearly $5,000 over the past 2 years. The emergency board meeting that followed was standing room only. Every homeowner showed up, many standing in solidarity beside me. Some wore nautical-themed clothing in subtle support, striped shirts, deck shoes, and even a few captain's hats. Karen arrived last, her usual confidence replaced with nervous glances and a rigid smile. She had dressed formally, as if appearing in court, in a navy blue blazer and pearl necklace. When the board president, not Karen, but a retired judge who'd remained largely hands-off until now, called the meeting to order, the atmosphere was tense. We're here to address several serious issues concerning the management of our homeowners association, he began gravely. First, the improper authorization of towing from private property, and second, the misappropriation of HOA funds. Ken immediately stood up. This is all a vindictive campaign because I enforced the rules about his illegal RV. I have been nothing but dedicated to maintaining property values and community standards while others, she gestured dramatically in my direction, flagrantly mock our regulations with stunts like parking a yacht in a residential driveway. The president calmly held up his hand. Miss Wilkins, the board has reviewed the bylaws carefully. The towing was not conducted according to our procedures, which require written notice and a waiting period. Furthermore, the financial audit has revealed some concerning patterns that require explanation. The treasurer stood and projected a spreadsheet on the wall, methodically going through each questionable expense. With each item, Karen's protests grew weaker, shifting from indignant denial to technical explanations about misclassified expenses and administrative oversights. The room grew increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted. Even her most stalwart supporters began to shift in their seats, avoiding eye contact. These were all legitimate expenses for community benefit, Karen insisted, her voice rising. The garden supplies were for the entrance plantings. The restaurant charges were for meeting with contractors. Everything I've done has been for Oak Ridge Estates, including the couple's massage at Mountain View Spa. The treasurer asked quietly, highlighting the line item charged on the same weekend as your anniversary post on social media. A murmur ran through the crowd. Karen's husband sank lower in his chair. Finally, the president addressed the room. In light of these findings, The board has voted unanimously to remove Karen Wilkins from her position as HOA secretary, effective immediately, and require full restitution of misappropriated funds. Appropriated funds totaling $4,732.18 and issue a formal apology and reimbursement to Daniel Wheeler for the improper towing incident. The silence that followed was broken by Karen's strangled gasp. Her face drained of color as she looked around the room, searching for allies and finding none. The same neighbors who had feared her clipboard and violation notices for years were now witnessing her downfall, some with barely concealed satisfaction. Aaron's voice rose. "You can't do this to me. I've given 7 years to this community. I'm the one who keeps property values up. I'm the one who makes sure people don't turn this place into a trailer park," I suggested quietly. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Then, with a dramatic sob, she grabbed her designer purse and rushed from the room, the door slamming behind her with a finality that echoed through the stunned silence.